The cold morning wind blew through the busy streets as people hurried off to their daily commitments. In the middle of this constant flow, a young, wealthy man stood out. With his impeccable suit, shiny shoes, and gold watch, he walked with an air of superiority, feeling better than everyone else. Every day, as he turned the corner on Central Avenue, which was always crowded with people, he would fix his gaze on an elderly man who had become a familiar sight. Homeless man, hunched over and dressed in worn-out clothes, sat beside a cardboard sign. His calloused hands from years of hard work and his sad, tired eyes told stories that no one stopped to hear. The young rich man, with a sneer, never missed a chance to belittle him. "How did you end up like this?" His voice dripped with irony. "Life hasn't been easy for you, has it?" And laughing loudly, continued on his way, satisfied with what he had said. The homeless man, however, remained silent. His eyes, though tired and deeply sad, observed every movement of the arrogant young man with great attention. He endured the cruel words calmly, as if he was waiting for something. As the young rich man walked away, a sense of discomfort began to stir in his heart. Something in that old man's gaze unsettled him, but he soon returned to his daily routine, and the feeling passed. And so, day after day, the scene repeated itself, an exchange of insults from one side and silent resistance from the other. Until one day, something unexpected happened. The routine of scorn had become a habit for the young rich man. Every morning, as he left his luxurious apartment, he would walk towards his office in the city center. And as he approached the corner of Central Avenue, he would mentally prepare himself for what he considered the best part of his morning. There he was, always in the same spot, the old homeless man, with his dirty and worn clothes, and a gaze that seemed to see right through anyone passing by. "Good morning, miserable one," he would say. "Still here? I thought you'd have given up on life by now." The young rich man would stop for a few seconds in front of the old man, his voice full of malice, a wicked smile on his face. The sound of the young rich man's sarcastic laughter would echo down the street, blending with the noise of cars and the quick chatter of people passing by. The old homeless man never responded, always remaining silent. His eyes, despite all the suffering he endured, held an impressive calm as he simply watched the young rich man. Sometimes the old man would slightly tilt his head, as if listening to something that no one else could hear. The young man, satisfied with his daily act, continued on his way, feeling powerful and superior to everyone else, finding great satisfaction in humiliating that poor defenseless man. It made him feel strong, as if it confirmed his power and control over life. Yet, there was something in the old, homeless man's eyes that intrigued him, and even during meetings and daily tasks, the image of that man sitting on the sidewalk would come back to his mind, bringing a discomfort he couldn't quite explain. There was something in the man's silence, in the way he looked, seemed to carry a hidden message, truth the young man couldn't understand, but that bothered him more and more. And so, the cycle continued until one day at work, unexpected problems shook the confidence that the young man had always had. That day would be different. The old homeless man, who seemed invisible to most, had a story that few knew. Years ago, he had been a successful businessman with a brilliant career and a family he deeply loved. He was once known as Robert, a name now forgotten on the streets. Robert came from a simple family, but through hard work and dedication, he earned a scholarship to one of the best universities in the country. He graduated with excellent grades, and his talent soon took him to the top of the business world. He was admired by many and seemed to have everything one could wish for. Robert married Elizabeth, the love of his life, and together they built a happy life. They had 2 children, Arthur and Evelyn. His family was his greatest joy. But then, a tragedy struck. A car accident suddenly took the lives of Elizabeth and Evelyn, leaving Robert and Arthur devastated. Pain of losing his wife and daughter at once was overwhelming. Arthur, who was very close to his mother and sister, was deeply affected. Unable to cope with the pain, he got involved with the wrong people and soon found himself trapped in the world of drugs. Robert, already shattered by the loss of his family, watched as his son drifted further away until, tragically, Arthur, his only son, lost his life. With his heart broken and no strength to carry on, Robert started drinking to numb the pain. What began as a way to escape the suffering quickly turned into an addiction. Depression took over his life, and in a short time, he lost everything he had built. His career, his home, and his dignity vanished, leaving him on the streets, a man broken by the cruel fate life had dealt him. Now there he was, invisible to most, but with a story of loss and pain that no one could imagine, by just seeing him sitting on the sidewalk. Even after everything that had happened, Robert found small signs of hope that helped him keep going. A kind smile from a passing stranger, a meal shared by another homeless person. These small acts of kindness, though simple, meant a lot to him. It was these moments of humanity that gave him the strength to continue, even when the young rich man humiliated him every morning. Robert knew that his dignity didn't depend on what that arrogant young man thought of him. Over the years, he had learned that true wealth lies in acts of kindness and compassion, even in the worst circumstance. As he endured the daily taunts, Robert watched the young man closely. He saw beyond the fine clothes and expensive watch, recognizing that the young man, despite his confident demeanor, seemed lost in a way that no amount of wealth could. Robert noticed a void in the young man, something he tried to hide behind his arrogance. And so, Robert continued to resist, maintaining his dignity in silence. But, over time, he noticed something was changing. A deeper look from the young rich man began to reveal a shift. Something different was happening, something that couldn't be ignored. On a sunny morning, like many others, the young rich man walked his usual path, firm steps and head held high. His face displayed the same smile as always, a smile that preceded another attempt to humiliate Robert. That day, something seemed different. As he approached the corner where Robert always sat, he noticed something he had never seen before. The homeless man, his tired yet serene eyes, lifted his head and fixed his gaze directly on the young man. This gaze was deep, almost penetrating, as if he were trying to see into the young man's soul, uncovering feelings he himself tried to hide. For a brief moment, the two stood still, their eyes locked. Inside the young man, something began to stir. A sense of discomfort grew in his chest, a restlessness he couldn't explain. It was as if, in that moment, Robert had seen something inside him that no one else could see. There was a hidden weakness in the young man, fear he kept hidden from everyone. Then, in a raspy but firm voice, Robert calmly asked, "Do you think you're better than me?" His words didn't carry a challenge, rather a genuine curiosity. The young man, surprised by the question, tried to respond, but the words came out shaky, almost like a whisper. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had never felt before. Robert's eyes continued to pierce through him, as if they were unraveling every layer of his soul, touching on something deep the young man tried to hide, even from himself. The young man looked away and quickly continued on his way. The feeling of discomfort didn't go away. The deep, penetrating gaze of that homeless man had left a mark on his mind, a doubt he couldn't shake. As he walked toward work, trying to regain his composure, couldn't stop thinking about that moment. What was it in that gaze that shook him so deeply? For the first time, he felt unsure of his own superiority, something he had always believed he possessed. Lost in thought, he arrived at the office where the day was just beginning. Pressures and responsibilities began to pile up, and he noticed that, unlike other times, confidence was shaken. The office environment was busy, people walking briskly and talking in low voices. The glass walls reflected the sunlight as executives in elegant suits moved from one meeting to another, focused on their task. The young man, trying to maintain his confident posture, entered the main meeting room where an important presentation awaited him. But he felt that something was different. The discomfort that had started at the corner with that man wouldn't leave him alone. A sense of anxiety was growing inside him, eroding his confidence. His colleagues noticed the change in his behavior. Some exchanged glances, but no one said anything, preferring to believe that the tension was caused by the day's responsibilities. The meeting began, and the lights were dimmed for the slide presentation. The young man tried to focus, but the homeless man's words echoed in his mind. "Do you think you're better than me?" That simple yet powerful phrase repeated in his thoughts, as if it were hammering at his conscience. When it was his turn to present, he stood up and walked to the front of the room. All eyes were on him, expecting the confidence and clarity he always demonstrated. However, when he began to speak, his voice trembled. He stammered, lost the thread of the presentation, and for a moment, an awkward silence filled the room. Faces of the executives were serious, and he could feel the weight of their expectations on him. One of the directors, noticing the uncomfortable situation, interrupted and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" That simple question, asked with sincerity, only heightened the young man's sense of inadequacy. He tried to regain control of the situation, but the presentation was already compromised. The looks of surprise and disappointment from his colleagues and superiors hit him like never before. When the meeting ended, he quickly left the room, feeling his face burn with shame. He locked himself in his office, trying to understand what had happened and why he was so shaken. The emotions he had ignored for so long were now clear, and he felt lost, unsure of how to deal with them. His confidence, which once seemed unshakable, was unraveling, and the image he had of himself was no longer the same. The memory of that homeless man's gaze and his words continued to haunt the young man for the rest of the day, as if they had planted a troubling doubt in his mind. In that moment of vulnerability, he began to notice something different within himself. For the first time, a bit of empathy emerged for the homeless man he used to despise every morning. A small voice inside him started suggesting that maybe life was about more than just status and wealth. He knew that soon he would have to pass by the corner where Robert always was again. But now there was a different feeling in his heart, something new and unfamiliar. As evening fell, the young rich man left the office. The weight of the day was evident in his slumped shoulders and slower steps. The avenue, usually bright and busy, seemed darker and quieter than usual. Proud and arrogant posture he always carried seemed to have been replaced by an air of reflection and uncertainty. As he approached the corner, his eyes automatically searched for the familiar presence of Robert. And there he was, the homeless man, sitting in his usual spot, with that calm expression and attentive gaze that never seemed to change. When the young man's eyes met Robert's, something different happened. Instead of ignoring or despising him, the young man felt a strange connection, a silent exchange of feeling. This time, he couldn't speak the words of disdain that were so common, and Robert, noticing the change, gave a slight smile, as if he understood what was happening inside the young man. And breaking the silence, Robert said, "Good evening," in a rough but surprisingly warm voice. The young man, still shaken by everything that had happened during the day, paused for a moment, surprised by the unexpected kindness. He responded only with a nod, unable to find the words. Robert observed the young man and said, "You seem different today." There was no sarcasm in his words, just curiosity and a hint of concern. The young rich man was unsettled. He had never felt so exposed, so out of control. He didn't know exactly what to say, but felt an urgent need to speak, to try to understand the confusion dominating his thoughts and emotions. It was a tough day, he finally admitted in a low voice, almost as if confessing a secret. "Nothing went as I expected." Robert looked at the young man with a steady and understanding gaze and said, "Sometimes life tests us, puts us in front of challenges, so we can learn something we need to know," he said with a voice filled with the wisdom that can only come from someone who has been through many hardships and pains. The young man who always humiliated Robert began to question his own actions. He wondered who he really was to judge others, and realized that he knew very little about the struggles each person faced. Noticing the doubt on the young man's face, Robert decided to continue speaking. Each of us has a story, a journey that shapes who we are. Sometimes, true strength lies in accepting our weaknesses and learning from them. These words stayed with the young man as he walked away, full of thoughts and with a heavy heart. He felt that something was changing inside him, but he didn't know how to deal with it. As he walked through the lit streets, he realized that the next day would bring new challenges and perhaps new opportunities to understand more about himself and Robert, the man he had always despised. That night, the young man had trouble sleeping. Robert's words echoed in his mind, like a sound impossible to ignore. He wondered what those lessons life was trying to teach really meant. The memories of a difficult day at work mixed with Robert's gaze, creating a confusion of feelings he couldn't control. Lying in his comfortable bed, he began to remember his own childhood. He always believed that his success was the result of his effort and determination. But now, he recalled the moments when he received help and support from the people around him. He thought of his parents, who worked hard to provide him with the best opportunities. They had faced many difficulties but never lost their humanity, never let life harden them. With these thoughts, the young man began to wonder if, in the pursuit of success, he had forgotten the true meaning of being human. Robert, with his quiet wisdom and dignity, seemed to have awakened these deep questions within him. He started to realize that maybe he wasn't so different from Robert as he wanted to believe. Getting up from bed, he went to the window and looked at the city lights shining in the distance. Suddenly, he felt small in the face of the vastness of the world and the lives that intersected within it. A feeling of humility began to grow in his heart, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The next morning, he woke up with a new determination. He felt the need to understand more about Robert and the life he led. He needed to find out what made Robert endure daily humiliations with such dignity and what he knew about life that the young man had yet to grasp. As he left his house, the young man felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. He walked through the streets with a different perspective, observing the people around him in a new way. They were no longer just passing figures in his life, but individuals with their own stories, their own struggles. When he reached the corner where Robert was always sitting, he stopped. He looked at Robert, the homeless man, with an empathy he hadn't felt before. Robert was there, sitting as usual, but this time, the young man didn't feel the need to humiliate him. Instead, he felt a deep curiosity, a sincere desire to know the man behind that tired appearance. "Can I sit down?" the young man asked, his voice now full of respect. Robert looked up, surprised, but after a moment, he smiled slightly and nodded, allowing the young man to sit beside him. As the young man sat next to Robert, he felt something strange. Something inside him was changing. The encounter with Robert seemed like the beginning of a path that could help him understand both life and himself better. In the days that followed, the young man started talking to Robert more frequently. With each new conversation, an unexpected bond began to form between them. The young man soon realized that Robert wasn't just a homeless man, but someone with a life and a story much more difficult than he had imagined. One afternoon, Robert began to talk more about his past. The young man listened intently. Robert shared how, after a series of tragedies, his life had changed drastically. He spoke about the loss of his family and the collapse of his career, which left him in a tough situation, but also about how all of this had taught him important lessons about the true meaning of life. Robert, thoughtful and with a sad look in his eyes, said, "Did you know that I used to run a large company? I was at the top, thinking success was all about having money and power. Suddenly, I lost everything. When you think you've been through the worst, life can surprise you with new challenges." The young man was shocked. He had never imagined that Robert had lived a life so similar to his own, but in a completely different reality. The difference between the young man's life of luxury and Robert's difficult life seemed almost surreal. Robert's story wasn't just about loss, but also about resilience and self-discovery. "I learned," Robert said, "that true wealth isn't in material things, in finding peace and purpose, even when facing difficulty. Every person we meet has something to teach us, even if it's not easy to see it." These words deeply touched the young man. He began to question the true meaning of a life with purpose. Robert's story was helping him see life differently and seek something more meaningful than just financial success. Over time, the young man realized that Robert wasn't just a living lesson, but also a mystery that challenged his previous ideas. He began to investigate more about Robert's life, to look for connections between the stories Robert told and his own life. During these investigations, he found surprising details that linked Robert to his past in unexpected ways. These discoveries started to open up new possibilities for the young man. He became dedicated to better understanding Robert's true story, diving into his research and exploring new perspectives. The young man felt a mix of curiosity and urgency, eager to discover what more he could learn from Robert and how it might change his own life. The young man grew increasingly curious about the connection he had with Robert, the homeless man. He spent hours going through old files, examining company records, and talking to people who had known Robert before he lost everything. It was during one of these investigations that he made a surprising discovery. In an old newspaper article, he found a photo from an elegant corporate event. Robert was in the picture, dressed in a sophisticated suit and displaying a confident smile. The young man immediately recognized the event because he had attended it years ago when he was just starting his career. What shocked him even more was seeing, next to Robert, a man who had been his mentor, beginning of his career. This man had given him important advice at the start of his professional journey. He was a well-known and respected mentor by everyone. The mentor had casually mentioned having an old business partner who was facing great difficulty. But the young man never imagined that this partner was Robert. Driven by curiosity and a need to better understand the situation, the young man sought out the mentor, who now lived peacefully in a small house in the countryside. Nervous and full of anticipation, he requested a meeting to discuss the past and, in particular, to learn more about Robert. When they met, the mentor, a man with gray hair and a gentle look, gazed at the young man with a mix of recognition and surprise. "Ah, you're interested in Robert's story," he said. "He was one of my best friends and partners. We worked together on many projects, and I considered him like a brother." But then a terrible tragedy struck. The mentor, with a heavy tone, began recounting Robert's story, revealing aspects the young man had never imagined. Robert not only lost his family and career, but he also faced a series of injustices and obstacles that pushed him into a deep despair. The mentor spoke with great sadness about the devastating impact of Robert losing his entire family. He described how Robert battled depression, a silent and lonely fight, and how he eventually lost everything he had worked so hard to build. Every word from the mentor hit the young man like a blow. He could feel Robert's story intertwining with his own life in ways he had never before realized. The revelation that Robert, before his losses, had been a successful man and a model of determination made the young man deeply question his own understanding of success and failure. Knowing that this man, now living on the streets, had once held such a high position shook him in a way he couldn't describe. With a heavy heart and a mind full of new questions, the young man returned to the city, determined to learn more about the life Robert had led. The conversation with the mentor had opened a new layer of understanding, and he knew there was still much to discover. The connection between their lives was proving to be more complex and profound than he had ever imagined. Now, he felt that he needed to talk to Robert once more to better understand how his own actions might have contributed to the tragedy that unfolded. With a heart full of regret and determination, the young man returned to the corner where Robert usually sat. The discovery that their lives were connected in a way he had never imagined weighed on his mind like a dark cloud. The sky that day was overcast, reflecting the turmoil of emotions he felt inside. His steps were slow, each one carrying the weight of recent revelations. When he finally approached Robert, he realized that something had changed within him. Robert was sitting in the same place as always, calmly observing the flow of people. The young man felt his heart race. When he finally found the courage to speak, his voice was shaky with nerves, but there was a sincerity that he had never felt before. "I need to talk to you. I've discovered something I can't ignore," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. Robert looked at the young man with a mix of surprise and mild concern. He made a gentle gesture, inviting the young man to sit beside him. "Sure, have a seat," Robert said, with that always calm and welcoming voice. The young man sat down right there on the ground, feeling the discomfort of the asphalt beneath him, but ignoring it. "I've discovered something about your past. I found an old photo of you in a newspaper, and I discovered that you were a partner of someone who helped me a lot at the beginning of my career," he said. Robert kept his gaze steady, listening carefully. The expression on his face was a mix of surprise and understanding as he processed the young man's words. He said nothing, patiently waiting for the young man to continue, which made the atmosphere even more charged with silent expectation. Robert seemed to have always expected that one day the young man would discover the truth about his past. In a calm yet curious tone, Robert asked, "And what does that mean to you?" The young man, still shaken, responded with a trembling voice, "I had no idea you were a person like me. I thought all homeless people ended up this way because they never tried, or because they wanted to be in that situation. I never imagined you were homeless because you suffered so much in life. Now, knowing all this, I feel a huge weight for having humiliated you and judged you, instead of trying to understand your story and help you." Robert watched the young man's eyes, reflecting a deep understanding of life. Once the young man finished speaking, Robert said, "Life has its ironies. Sometimes we walk paths we don't fully understand, but what truly matters is how we learn and grow from the lessons life offers." These words touched the young man in a way he didn't expect. He had never considered how his actions could impact someone so far removed from his reality. For the first time, he felt the weight of his choices and actions and began to reflect on how much they affected others. Robert then started to share more about his life, recounting his losses and how he overcame them, but also the moments of unexpected kindness he encountered, even in the hardest time. His words were moving, revealing both the pain and the beauty of his life experience. As the young man listened intently, he realized that Robert's story was filled with examples of resilience and humanity, which made him begin to question his own worldview and perception of people. The connection between the two grew stronger with each conversation, and the young man began to understand that true transformation wouldn't come just from recognizing his past mistakes, but from the desire to make a difference now. The idea of correcting his past actions started to take shape in his mind, and he began to see possibilities for a different future, both for himself and for Robert. The following weeks were marked by deep conversations and regular meetings, and he started to realize that Robert, unintentionally, had become a mentor in his life. During one of these conversations, Robert shared an old dream. He had always wanted to create a project that would help people overcome challenges, something that would give purpose to all the hardships he had faced. The young man, with tears in his eyes, began to think about how he could help make that dream a reality. Determined to support Robert, he started planning and researching ways to create a shelter and a community center. He wanted this place to be more than just a refuge. He envisioned it as a space where people could find new opportunities for learning and starting over. The plan was to create a place where people like Robert could have a second chance, finding the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. The young man dedicated himself completely to this project, investing both his time and money to make it happen. He reached out to architects and community development experts, organized fundraising campaigns, and managed to involve influential people who were moved by the cause. With each step, the young man began to understand more about how true generosity and empathy could transform lives. Robert watched everything with a mix of surprise and gratitude, realizing that the project not only offered a new opportunity for people in difficult situations, but also showed a significant change within the young man himself. It was as if the young man was seeking a way to apologize, finding a greater purpose by creating something that could benefit many people. As the project progressed, he was challenged not only by practical aspects, but also by his own fears and insecurities. Building the shelter and community center required more than just financial resources. It demanded deep emotional commitment and a connection with those who would be helped. He began visiting shelters and community centers, listening to the stories of people who lived there. This experience opened his eyes to a new way of seeing life, the true meaning, helping others. He realized that while the project was an important step, the most significant changes came from small daily actions, in how he treated people, and in the decisions he made to improve the world around him. However, construction was not easy. The young man faced numerous obstacles, from financial difficulties to logistical problems. Each challenge seemed to test his determination and intentions, but he remained steadfast, driven by the certainty that he was doing something truly important. As the project neared completion, he realized that the transformation he sought went far beyond the physical construction of the community center. He discovered a new way of living, based on empathy, understanding, and a deeper connection with others. The inauguration day was approaching, and the young man knew that this moment would be very important, not just for Robert and those who would benefit, also for himself. On the day of the inauguration, the streets around the new community center were decorated with banners and balloons, and a crowd gathered to celebrate the realization of a dream that once seemed impossible was now becoming a reality. The young man, now more mature, was nervous, full of hope. Robert stood by his side, with a satisfied smile on his face. The young man prepared to give his opening speech. Robert, who had been a source of inspiration and learning, was now at the center of this new phase of the young man's life. He had become a symbol of resilience and transformation, and his role in the project was essential. The young man stepped onto the stage, feeling the attentive gaze of the crowd. He began his speech by thanking everyone who contributed to the project. But soon his words became more personal and emotional. "When I started this journey," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I wasn't sure what I was looking for. But after meeting Robert and hearing his story, I realized there was something much deeper to be discovered. We all face challenges, and life tests us in ways we don't always understand. But what really matters is how we respond to those challenges." He looked at Robert, who stood beside him, with a deep expression of gratitude. He said, "Robert showed me that true wealth isn't found in money or status, but in how we face life's challenges. This community center isn't just a building, it's a symbol of a new way of seeing the world and connecting with each other." As he spoke, the young man felt a surge of emotion, and his words were momentarily paused as he took a deep breath. "I want this place to be a beacon of hope for everyone who needs a second chance. And I want it to be a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter where we start or where we are." The crowd applauded, and the young man felt a sense of fulfillment and peace. Robert, standing next to him, was visibly moved, his eyes shining with tears of gratitude. He had witnessed the profound transformation in the young man, and now saw a dream that began as a simple act of empathy and solidarity come to life. The event was a success, but the true impact lay in what the community center represented for the lives of the people. Individuals from different backgrounds were there, showing that change was possible and that hope could flourish even in the most difficult circumstances. At the end of the day, the young man and Robert stood in silence, watching the activity around the center. The transformation of a simple space into a place of opportunity and support was deeply significant for the internal change they both had experienced. "You did it," Robert said, his eyes filled with tears. "You did more than build a building. You helped build a future." The young man, reflecting on all that had happened, smiled and replied, "We did this together, and this is just the beginning." He still felt in his heart that he could do more for Robert, that he could help him restart his life. After a few minutes of thought, he offered Robert an important position within his company. Now Robert would have a new chance to rebuild his life and find happiness again, without facing the hardships and humiliations he had endured, just like all the people who would have the chance to start over at the community center they had created. As they walked away from the community center, the young man reflected on the journey he had taken. The lesson he learned was clear. Sometimes, it takes a deep connection with others to discover the true meaning of life. Redemption doesn't come only from acknowledging past mistakes, from the ability to turn those experiences into something that can benefit others and make a difference in the world. Every encounter, every challenge, and every act of kindness come together to create a greater vision of humanity and hope. In the end, what truly matters is what we do with the lessons we learn, as that defines who we really are. If this story moved you, you can make a difference too. Share this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. And don't forget to leave your comment. It's important for us to know if you enjoyed this story and the message it conveyed.